In this video, we're going to do something a little bit different than what we usually do. We usually do detailed review discussions and story analysis of all kinds of games, independent games or AAA titles that we happen to really love, but we try to do big deep dives. This is not going to be one of those videos. We're just looking at this game that intrigues us, that seems strange in the kinds of ways that both of us seem to really like. We're just going to react to our experience with this game. We played through the prologue of this game, Omori, which is a turn-based role-playing game in the vein of Super Nintendo RPGs, a top-down pixelated looking game, but there's horror mixed in and comedy. It's extremely strange. We're going to get into how strange it is. We're just going to be giving you our straight up thoughts of what we think of this game based off of just playing the prologue, which is about the first 4 to 5 hours. So if you're curious what Omori is and you really have no idea, this is a great video to watch because we're not going to spoil anything past the prologue. I didn't know a lot about this game beforehand. I kind of just heard about it, like little bits. I got the sense that it was going to be an Earthbound or Undertale type game, and that it was going to be about young characters in harrowing, horrifying situations with comedy along the edges. Science fiction-y, but also kind of Lovecraftian in its psychological horror. This game so far seems to fit the bill. It opens in a very striking way. It opens with this line, this black line in a white room, and you're just following the line down, and then it ends up being a light bulb. It's this charcoal black light bulb. You have this main character just lying on the floor. The only objects in the room are a cat, some Kleenex, and a notebook. And there's a door, which you can't open initially.
You have a laptop with a background that's just a brick wall.
And the calendar in the laptop too, right? The calendar is just day after day of the exact same thing. Either this kid is trapped in this white space, or the white space is some kind of figment covering up the drab everydayness of this kid's life. Or just maybe it's just the white space is figuratively a layer on top of just the repetition of whatever life this kid has. Maybe he doesn't have a lot of engagement. And so that little calendar is just saying like, today was okay, like nothing's happening. And this character's just lying there. So immediately I got the feeling like this game's gonna be really depressing.
This is a sign of things to come for the game, because the game sort of starts with nothing and it throws very sparse details at you one at a time. It gives you more questions than answers at first. Even as you approach the nearest life form, which is the cat, and you talk to it, it says, you know, are you waiting for something to happen? And nothing does happen for a while. That's when you try to open the door, it doesn't open, and there's a thud in the distance, which turns out to be a knife that fell from the sky. The game starts with nothing, and then the next thing is a knife. That's the only thing that makes the main character feel apparently comfortable enough to leave their little space.
That's the weapon that you're using. This game is, like I said, it's a turn-based role-playing game, right? So everyone has weapons, and his weapon is this knife, and you get it in this white space, but you don't know why it ends up there. It just sort of shows up. That opening sequence, it immediately grabbed my attention, in the sense that I knew this game was going to be weird. I didn't know how weird. The white space at the start is such a perfect introduction to this world because it really is abstract. It doesn't make sense. It's this white space where the cat is talking to you and the cat is immediately breaking the fourth wall. When it asks, are you waiting for something? That's literally talking to the player. What are you waiting for, right? So it's like, okay, I got it. You finally get to open the door and then everything changes and there's another contrast.
Color explodes onto the screen. There's a new sort of pastel-based color palette surrounding you, and you find your friends. The first thing that your friends do is have a bout of childish bickering about pointless things, and one of them seems to be above it all and the most charming one.
There's immediately characterization. We have Aubrey and Kel, seem to be brothers and sisters, or at least they fight like brothers and sisters. I don't know that they actually are. They're at least so close that they're just bickering constantly. You have this kid Hero, who by just the name of alone suggests to me some kind of archetype of character with a savior complex of some sort. He's seemingly perfect. His ability down the line is to charm people. I'm assuming that's gonna flip on its head at some point, because, you know, no one is really perfect. That's so obviously a play on a trope. Probably gonna see that totally upend. You have eventually do meet another character named Mori, and she's like the smart one. She's the one that just has the master plan, seems to know everything. We don't really know why she's so smart or why she knows things. She doesn't really travel with you. She just sort of stays at a picnic, and that becomes your safe space. We have this character Basil, is this other friend that you have who has a wreath of flowers that he puts on his head, and he shares with his friends, and he kind of like make things with you. I immediately got the sense these friends are being set up as contrast to your own personality in various ways. They're all the things that you're not, and you're just this literal black and white figure while they are these colorful beings existing around you. This main character is this anhedonic character who can't seem to feel the way everyone else feels, and everyone around him is just feeling things so much, and they're so enthusiastic about life, and he's just sort of dragging his feet through daily life.
Right away, there's this open-ended question of like, well, what is this character afraid of? Because they were too afraid to leave at the beginning until they grabbed the knife. It seems clear enough that his friendships and his surrounding world and the way it looks and just the way that everything feels like a fantasy land. It seems like, well, he's afraid of something, but not most of this. The whole time I'm just waiting for like, when is the shoe gonna drop? When does it matter? The shoe drops around the time that we get to a giant shoe. But yeah, so you're in this playground. That's like the first area pretty much.
Before you get to the playground, there's like this cat on top of the room staring down with a giant smile, and it's like forcing you to be happy. It's kind of like the video that I made on our channel about Forza Horizon being a dystopia, because it's just sort of this endless, ceaseless happiness that's required of you. This game kind of has that world to it. So clearly that to me is like setting up some kind of roller coaster drop where it's like we're rising higher and higher and we're just going to crash at some point.
It feels fake. There's something underneath the surface. And so the first area you get to is just a playground, and that's when you have a little game of hide and seek. You draw the short straw and you are it, and you pursue all these kids who are really terrible hiders. Once the game is called, you find that one of the kids is still missing, and that turns out to be Basil. Basil gets kidnapped by this, I don't know how to describe this character named Boss. They're the first boss of the game.
Boss was a bit of foreshadowing for what he did to Basil, right? Because he was this ostracized kid. There was literally a sign in the playground, and it was saying like, don't let him play with us, he's not allowed. He's this kid who to me becomes seethingly bitter about the mistreatment people put toward him. Of course, I'm sure that mistreatment is his fault, but of course it's circular. He's hard to be around, so then people don't want to be around him, which makes him harder to be around. So he seems like that kind of kid. But it clearly seems to me all these kids, they're living in this weird fantasy forced happy, or at least fake happy space, and then there's this one character who they don't allow into that space, and so he's the one who then becomes the impeder into it and pulls that Basil kid out, and then that's like the impetus for your journey. The first fight you have in the game is with Boss. Up until the point that you face off against Boss, you're just wandering through a kind of basic role-playing world where you're just talking to characters, getting to know them a little bit. And then you fight this kid named Boss, and the combat system is, to me, more rigid than I expected. I guess I had grown used to things like Persona or Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you have such an active turn-based system, where it's not even really turn-based anymore. Persona is still turn-based, but there's so much happening at once that it really feels very active. This one is strictly old school in terms of its style. But there's also a lot of color in the battle system. That's one of the major differences. Everything is kind of muted mostly up to that point. And then when the battle system happens, it's not pixelated. Like all the enemies are like these crayon drawings, or like in a notebook or something. And they're much more animated. Even something as simple like the borders on the edge, it seemed to have these etched notebook drawings. They all look childlike. That's the thing I'm noticing all over the place. It's just sort of this mix of childlike art mixed in with Super NES pixel graphics expectations. When I see Super Nintendo-like graphics, that brings me back to childhood. It makes me think of being a kid. And I wonder if they chose that art style specifically to make you reminded of being a kid. And then they have all these kid-like border things, right? The notebook drawings and stuff. And then they put you in this really uncomfortable space that's already an emotional contrast. There's this weird play happening where it's like this game has this Super NES pixel graphics, and then they also have all this like weird artsy stuff mixed in. You get into this battle and you're noticing all this art and everything, and then it turns out that a big part of the battle system, aside from the generic fight and run and use your skills and use items, is your emotions. This seems to be something that's in the whole game, where like this game wears its emotions on its sleeve. Our first impression of that protagonist character, he's clearly a dejected, removed kid emotionally. He's having a hard time with his emotions. He might be depressed. He very likely is depressed, or at least disconnected from what other people are feeling. The battle system circles around emotions, where it becomes like rock, paper, scissors, where if you're happy, that does better than someone who's angry. If you're angry, that does better than someone who's sad. If you're sad, you're better off against someone who's happy. the ways that emotions kind of trump each other. It really starts to matter the emotion of your characters that you're fighting with and the emotions of the enemies. That's like the little wrinkle in the combat. At the very beginning, my first impression of the combat was that it was simple. That emotional stuff didn't really come into play that much until much later.
The emotion system does make it a lot more straightforward. By giving you those very clear parameters, you can actually make some consistent decisions and actually develop a skill for always making sure you're taking advantage of that emotion system.
The combat seems like it's not the highlight of the show. At least for me, it sort of feels like that's not why I'm playing, is to have fun with this combat. If I could play the rest of the game without fighting, I probably would. Again, we're only playing the prologue. It seems like there could be some clever stuff later. I'm sure the emotion thing is going to get really complicated down the line.
The thing drawing me forward is pretty much entirely the story, because it's told in such a careful and very particularly styled way that is not simply a JRPG, right? Like it feels more, like you said, like an Earthbound, where it has its own character and it takes itself seriously, not as a marketable thing, but as a creative endeavor. That's the thing I really like about it, and I wish that it also was similar to Earthbound in that the combat was also cool, because Earthbound is actually fun even when you're fighting.
Or like Undertale, where they completely circumvent combat in a clever way. I mean, that's what makes Undertale work from the bit that I've played. By the way, I haven't finished Undertale, but we probably will finish it for this channel, so like and subscribe so you can check it out when we finally do. Yeah, the bit of Undertale that I played, what's so great about that, it has all the artsiness of like a game like this, except it also is just being artsy about the combat, like completely upending your expectations. Every encounter is not what you expect. There's even secrets around it, which I don't fully understand or know, but my understanding is there's secrets in that game. We'll suspend our judgment fully until we finish the thing, but so far the combat seems most fitting for the genre of game that's being remarked on here. The emotions and stuff is really just status effects. I know that that's a wrinkle, but it's not as significant of a wrinkle as I would have thought. It definitely fits thematically. We should say this though. The moment that you finally fight for the first time against boss, right after that is when the game throws another curveball at you.
Once again, you find yourself in a white room, and even more than the first time, it's really not clear if anything is going to happen. You have that same cat asking, are you expecting something to happen? And there's really nowhere to go. You can walk around and be chased by these sort of hand snakes. I figured it out, but I figured it out the wrong way. I was almost positive immediately, like I gotta stab myself. So I went into the item menu and I tried to see if I could do that.
Why did you think that? Is that a normal inclination?
Because the cat doesn't just say that thing. If you cycle through it, it says that there's always a way out, but it's painful. It's something like that.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
They hit it exactly in perfect plain sight. The first menu option that is normally a series of question marks is instead the word stab. Kind of wish it were more like a Metal Gear thing where you gotta just go and do it manually.
Yeah, from the item. You end up returning to that white room a few more times, at least in the prologue, and stabbing yourself seems to be the only way out. You're just stabbing yourself again and again.
That's pretty messed up. But then the game has no shortage of twists and turns. You would think, oh, there are two worlds. There's white space and then there's this pastel thing. Well, there's a third world. There's who you actually are in reality, which is a kid named Sunny. And you're just a kid who's living in a home that contains no father or mother, just notes from your mother. You wake up at night, so it has this feeling of you woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night and now you can't go back to sleep, so you have to sort of spend your time somehow. You hear a knock on the door. And the knock on the door has a sort of imagined projection that goes along with a voice that you can hear, which is the voice of Mari, the caretaker friend, the friend who seems to be at least implied to be the oldest one because she wants to take care of everybody. She is knocking at the door and there's an immediate doubt in your mind that this is actually Mari, because there's a question of, do you want to open the door? That question wouldn't exist if Sunny really thought that Mari was out there. He probably has reason to believe she's not there. It kind of already implies right there she might be dead. Might be a Silent Hill 2 situation where you get a letter from your dead wife. I decided to open it, which is probably a stupid decision, but when I did so, I found that instead of Mari, there was a ghoul thing. Sunny is smart enough to not fully open the door, slams the thing shut, and then goes to puke. When you go back to the bathroom, this is a similar thought process that I had where it's like, okay, I know I'm in a horror story and I know there's a mirror. So I gotta look in the mirror as many times as I can to make sure that I catch the moment where the thing happens. It is probably one of the most pointless but always satisfying jump scares because it's never unexpected, but it's just like obligatory. It doesn't have any value except as like a reassurance that the person knows that they could have done that. And it's very strange. I literally made a beeline back to the bathroom because I was like, now I'm going to get to see this monster in the bathroom mirror. And I did, in all of its detail. There's some sort of zombie out there to get you.
We just get this taste of this character, Sunny. It probably is the same character as that kid Omori, but the game doesn't straight up say that. We have these parallel storylines. It seems to be the same character because it has the same friends. It has Mari and Kel shows up in the second instance.
Yeah.
It seems to have the same friends, although it could be a former friend. Maybe it's going to end up being the thing where that's the reason why Omori is so depressed, because maybe he had something to do with that Sunny character's demise, or he was around when that character passed away or something. Like maybe this is all in the past. I don't know. But it's a completely different setting than the one that you're experiencing in the main game. What fits about you saying, because actually this is somewhat of a revelation for me when you said that it was the same character. What fits nicely about that is that Sunny character is in a real place, but the place that the bulk of the game takes place in is a kind of warped fairy tale child fantasy. It seems like a lot of the characters that you're meeting are childlike versions of things. So like when you have a wormhole enemy, instead of a scientific wormhole, it's a literal worm with a hole. To me, I immediately thought, okay, this is a child's perception of the world. The fact that Basil lives in a shoe, this is from a fairy tale. You know how children, when they make monsters, they just sort of combine things, real things together, different limbs and stuff? It sort of seems like, okay, the enemies are a lot of that. A lot of the characters in the playground, they're not all human looking, and they just kind of look like amalgamations of things. The fact when you're in the fights, a lot of the characters look like notebook drawings, that to me again fits that maybe this is all in the mind of this kid, his mental escape.
Yeah, and it's a mental escape that feels really chaotic, partly because this imaginary world seems like a child's reaction to something very real and tragic in some way. The problem with any time that a child goes through something traumatic is that it often gets mixed in with the sheer confusion of the situation, where they just don't know what to expect of this world that they live in. They don't know what's normal and what's not. They can't be sure that things are going to be okay or not. They need adults to reassure them about those things and explain things. When whatever this tragedy is, when this not yet revealed tragedy happens, it seemed like it had this effect on Sunny where it just made Sunny not necessarily make up an imaginary world on purpose, but actually do it on accident because Sunny doesn't know what's going on. To some extent, it seems like Sunny is forced to believe in monsters because that's the only way to explain what has happened, whatever it is.
And then when you have misinterpreted meaning, well, meaning is the scaffold by which we walk through the world. And if you have your meaning totally warped, well, then the ground on which you walk on is now tilted. You have to cope with that somehow. Maybe one way to do that is through imagination. And then, of course, your imagination is just the summation of whatever you fixate on. And in this case, this kid is fixating on knives and violence and blood and bullying and fairy tales. It's sort of an amalgamation of different concepts. So far, that's the strongest thing about this game. The horror sequence was really cool because it sort of was a reminder. We know what the rules are in terms of these types of RPGs, but we're also going to be playing with other kinds of tropes, horror tropes. We're going to be playing with emotional instability and trauma and something grotesque. I'm sort of waiting for the moment that things get really gory or violent. It feels like violence is on the cusp, waiting. Just when you stab yourself, that's already a really heavily violent thing, but it happens fairly quickly, but it sort of is letting you know like, hey, we're gonna do some stuff. We're just doing the prologue, we're not that far. It feels to me like the game has been slowly winking along the way. Hey, stick with us. We're gonna pay this off at some point. We have the ability to do it, but we're trying to pace it. So right now, it does seem like I'm dealing with pacing the whole way. Now we're actually in the RPG proper. I think I understand what the game is now. I got like a kind of overworld. You get a headspace map, which the name headspace map, that very strongly implies it really is in his head. You see all these little land masses, these little sections you're going to go to. It's like 7 or 8 or 6. It turns out you have to then overcome your fears to progress. My understanding seems to be that we're going to be crossing through this overworld, and a lot of the blocks along the way are just going to be the fears of the characters. Instead of just unlocking items to progress, you're unlocking courage along the way. That emotional thing is seeped in. So it's not just emotion in the combat, it seems to be emotion outside of the combat. In terms of the emotional stability of your character, is what's getting them through. Maybe the whole point of the game is we're witnessing this character's attempt to deal with whatever is riling up emotionally in his body that's making living hard. So then you go to Otherworld. It's an extra step removed from the normal world that we know. There's even fewer familiar elements in terms of the objects around you. It's not like generic forests anymore. Now you have traffic cones everywhere to cut through, a junkyard of items and technology, but kind of looks like 80s technology. Like there's tapes and things, cassette tapes. It's old school. It's suggestive to me of an older version of an imagination. And this is actually when the humor begins. This game is so dark in a lot of ways and so kind of seething underneath, but there's lots of humor dispersed everywhere. The Otherworld is really where that humor starts to kind of brighten. You meet a miniature centaur named Smol, and he has all of these awards for how small he is, and he gets the best half horse, or the best half human, the smallest half human. All the variations on the one thing that he has, which is being a small centaur. And it's like really sad but funny because he only has one thing that he's special about, and that becomes the only thing that he just uses again and again. And it's all implied in that one little room. And then you have another character who's like obsessed with a pop star, and that is the same concept where it's like this character has only like one thing going for them, and it's just they're the biggest fan of this pop star, so that becomes the entirety of their personality as this pop star. I don't know if there's some meaning to that. These characters you keep bumping into, they seem to define their whole identity by one thing. It's being goofy about it. There's a character that pops up in the junkyard area of the Otherworld, and it's Life Jam. He just pops out of a dumpster or like the back of a container. It's exactly an homage to the Kool-Aid Man popping out of the wall, and he's trying to offer you life and stuff, and he's super over enthusiastic and dumb. So there's all this little referential humor. Also, the Life Jam guy might be also a reference to the 80s because the Kool-Aid Man was like a big commercial back then too. Weird 80s theme in that area. You fight the planets and stuff. For some reason you beat up Pluto. Pluto has thick arms, like his biceps like are super expansive, and he flexes to make himself feel better. That's his emotional state, is flexing his arms, and that's how he feels happy about himself.
And he's like a fugitive. He's like running from some authority that wants to take him out.
Because he wants to keep all the planets up in a row. I don't know if that joke about Pluto being a fugitive is about Pluto not being a planet anymore. There's humor mixed in. The game is goofy in the middle of being kind of horrific and warped. That's part of what makes it warped and fun in a cool way. If you see this game from the outside and you think, okay, this game is just going to be extremely emotionally sappy and over the top emo, I don't think it's exactly that. It actually is very emo. It is very, oh, let's just be really sad. But it also just has a lot of childish humor and goofiness. There's a lot of play.
Well, every part of it, the humor, the dread, and just everything between, it's all so thoroughly from the perspective of a child. This game has the benefit of showing everything from this lens of innocence and confusion. It makes things scarier, right? It makes things feel more vulnerable. It leans into that vulnerability.
The game right now, just doing the prologue, I'm glad that I made myself do the whole prologue. Because I do think that very early in the prologue, I started to get the feeling, oh no, this isn't going to be as good as I want it to be. And as it was going further along, I was slowly getting more into the combat, in the sense of like, okay, I can see how the emotion system does complicate things at least a little bit. But the weirdness of the game is appealing to me. I really, really like the weirdness of the Otherworld, all these references that are kind of mixed in. I like all the fourth wall breaks. I like the horror and how well done it is. I like the contrast in the art design, that it's not just pixelated. I like that it's the Notebook art style and the implication about this childhood fantasy or childhood fixations becoming part of the world that you're in. I think all of that is layered really, really, really nicely. I've heard enough about Omori. I don't know anything about the ending. I don't know anything about where it goes. But I just know that people look at it as a really heavy-hitting emotional journey with strange tropes mixed in. I'm excited about that. I'm glad that I'm playing this for this channel and that we get to talk about it.
Some of the quirks are not always appealing to me, but I really love every moment that is part of the main story. I love.
I feel exactly the same way as you, in terms of I just want to know what happens next. The mystery surrounding this game, why this character is in this space, what happened to this character, because clearly something happened, all of that is set up really nicely.